let's start with the panel. And for that, thank you so much, our dignitaries from Elsina, from Broadband India Forum, Qualcomm, and Micromax for joining us today. If you can start with some thoughts on the context that we have, under which we got motivated to do the report, and what Madam Aruna also shared about the journey that needs to be calibrated, and we have to go forward in making it a mobile-first, welfare-enhancing economy.
Thank you very much for having me here today. It's been a great privilege to listen to the presentation and be part of the launch here. From Broadband India Forum, I tend to look upon these not as smartphones, but as broadband devices. And if you take that perspective, we do have a long way to go. We may have 1 billion connections, which is just 600 million maybe of unique users in India. And if we want broadband to percolate like we wish for the growth of India, then we need to have 1 billion broadband devices today like mobile devices. So whatever is done to make that happen will benefit India, whether it be 1%, 1.4% of the GDP growth, or the common man's impact in everyday things that he does. I would like to go back to 2005. A similar situation was there at that time. And one of the big things that kicked off telecom in a way then was, at that time, the government was presented with a report. I happened to be associated with that too at that time. It was a report by Ovum of England, and that showed that great things were happening in telecom, growth was fantastic, potential is very high and all that, but much of the value addition is actually going out of India. That hit the government like a solid hammer, and that's what spurred many of the things which subsequently led to the Sri Perumbudur ecosystem, etc., many manufacturing activities. See, everything has to start in a modest way. So today, if people tell me that smartphones are only being assembled, not really manufactured, I take it as fine. That's how we start. That's how China started some time ago. But we have to quickly move to the next phase. And that's the beauty of the work which has been done by IMAB. They are talking of a phased approach from what was probably 6%. About a year ago, I was told it was 1-2%. Today, I'm happy that it has come to 6%. So we need to accelerate our phased growth to prevent the value addition going out of the country. And while you may say smartphones are finely priced, I would tend to disagree. If we want 1 billion smartphone devices, broadband devices to happen, the prices have to come down further. And that can be made possible only through more of local manufacture, local design, local R&D. I think the incentives for making that happen are the means that we have to explore today. So I think the study is a very contextually relevant one. I compliment you all on that. I think, like Madam Aruna said, we're scratching the surface. I think we need to go a long way, and all efforts need to be made. Parties like Micromax have really put India in the map of the global map, the way you have started on manufacture and doing things. But we look to you for also accelerating to the next level.
As it's a popular adage, a good start is half the job well done. So compliments to the Government of India, to the think tank in terms of making this policy of Made in India. As Sir also said, and Aruna ma'am also said, this is just a start, this is not the end. But from the industry side, what I can assure you is this is something that the entire industry is very confident about and are looking at putting more and more investment for the Made in India setup in India. Now, as we move, just to give you a backdrop of what Micromax is doing, we currently have 2 facilities, one each at Rudrapur and Telangana, which are completely operational. And between the 2 of them, we have a manufacturing capacity of 3 million units a month that we can do over here. Telangana has just gone operational about 4 months back. We also have a third one, which is in Rajasthan at the Bhiwadi cluster, which is coming up. Hopefully, next 60 days should see that also getting started. But as rightly you also pointed out, these are right now pure assembly setups. So what we are doing is we are getting SKD and we are getting them assembled. But what this has allowed us to do is now we have a more better control over the industrial design. So I have a team who's designing the products now in-house. So we don't look at hiring a third party who does the design for us and then we take that into production. So more and more now the molds are getting to India, and these what Neil also said about the A cover and the B cover being assembled in India, that's something that we've started. We are also on the verge of importing our first set of CKD lines. Now, just for the benefit of all the media people over here, I'm sure most of you know, but there are two common terminologies, one of which is called PCB, which is actually a printed circuit board, and the second, which is called a PCBA, which is basically the assembled PCB. Now what happens is PCB is that small wafer green thing that you usually see, probably a micro millimeter kind of a thickness kind of a board. And once the components are mounted onto that, that's called a PCBA. Typically right now what is happening is the PCBAs are getting imported. They're getting assembled into the body of the phone, and then you put in the charger and the battery, you do your test setups and all that stuff. But hopefully before the advent of the next financial year, we'll be able to mount those components on the PCB here locally in India, which is actually what we call popularly as the CKD, or the completely knockdown kits being imported. Everybody keeps talking about challenges, and I'm sure challenges are there for all the countries, but all the countries who've actually come to this level of manufacturing has been able to do that by the sheer cooperation between the government and the industry, and that's something we also look forward to. So 5 years back, whenever you used to talk about fabs, people used to say there is no production which is happening, and when you wanted to talk to industry about production, they said there were no setup. So with this vision of the government of India, the think tank, what has happened is at least we've kick-started production, and I think it's more a matter of time that the supporting infrastructure also develops. It means as a brand, see, everything can't be done by the brand itself. I mean, let's say Micromax can't start getting into making of the resistors or the inductors or the other components, but what is this doing is, because there are perennial and a perpetual demand of the industry now over here, many more, not only Indian, but even foreign companies, foreign component manufacturers have started setting up their facilities over here. This will allow us to take a bigger and a better control of the entire bill of material. See, today, what happens is, I still have my design team, which sits out in China, and the reason of that is compulsion, not a choice. Because most of the semiconductor are first introduced in China, and it takes usually anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks for those semiconductors or any of the new electronics to be brought into India, which typically means if I have a setup exclusively in India, I would be running 6 to 8 weeks behind or back of the global competitors that we have. But at the same time, as the Taiwan setup was spoken about, there's a lot of initiatives which are being taken at the industry and the government level in terms of bringing up the manpower or the workforce to become at par with the global competitors, with the global peers. So with all that happening, in our company also it happens wherein we have very frequent exchange between our China design team and our design team who sits up in Delhi and Bangalore. So all this is work in progress, but I can assure you that over the next 24 months, there's a lot much more which will be visible, both in terms of stats and in terms of job creation, in terms of holding up to the core value of the mobile phone being actually made in India. Yeah, just to also talk about one more thing is the size of investment into a single production plant can be anywhere between few hundred crore rupees. So all this positivity which has been shown by the government has also allowed industry to move hand in glove with the government and actually mark up those investments to actually go ahead and realize the vision of getting 100% made in India component product. But at the same time, what's also important is this has also allowed us to move a lot more into very, India-centric services. I mean, we all talk about financial inclusion. We all today in this era of so-called demonetization, we are again talking about electronic money, and a lot of these payment companies like MobiKwik, Paytm, UDO, and all bringing up these electronic currency in the hands of a normal average Indian consumer. All this would not have been possible if we would have been churning out designs from, let's say, China and Taiwan, because what happens over there is more of the global play. The ability for the local companies to prosper and develop a local solution. I mean, I'm really pleased to have Web over here, who's also a partner from a multilingual company. And what we've seen is when we are putting the multi-language software onto our mobile phones, 85%, no less than 85% of the consumers are actually opting of one of those multiple language solutions. So which means typically if this was all, let's say, cooked somewhere in China and Taiwan and brought to India, we would have actually left behind those 85% people who are today finding a companion in a smartphone just because it's more relational to them. So all this, from the strategy perspective, is only helping India to become more united, and is helping not only, I mean, what we spoke and talked about over here was the bill of material and the, obvious advantage that will be coming from the bill of material. But just look at the allied industries, all the allied infrastructure which is growing, as sir also, rightly pointed out, for India to be, those few hundred million or billion people to be on the broadband. We all agree it's going to be mobile broadband. It's not going to be wired broadband. Obviously, the capex requirement of the wired broadband versus the ROI which comes up is far more delayed, and hence mobility is the way to go. In today's world, the mobile phone has become a true companion. As ma'am also pointed out, it's become a companion which is helping you lead a life. It's no longer good living, it's actually a means of living. I mean, there's so much we are doing on the mobile phone.
My question for you are Parag are twofold. One, what in your opinion is the most critical step or steps required to transform India into a global manufacturing hub? And second, our research shows that semiconductor components such as chipset contributes to almost half of the smartphone costs. Now, for these high value components, how do you localize value being generated in India? What are the steps do you think the manufacturing ecosystem can take up and usher so that the high value components also get localized in India?
Thanks, Chirantan. So you are right that the PCBA constitute a very large proportion of the overall cost of the mobile phone, and the components which go into the PCBA require complex manufacturing facilities. And I agree with you, it kind of becomes a big issue. And we already had tried once to kind of put a fab manufacturing facility in India. Because of the investment that is required to build such facilities, it has basically not taken off that much. But the main point here is that in order for any facility to take up, right, which is of that high value in nature, you need to have some local demand, right? You can't really manufacture these high value components in India and then export it into China for this whole thing to get assembled in China, right? So we need to take steps, as the report and your report very clearly points out, that it has to be stage by stage approach. First, we have to create demand in India, and the assembly of these components has to happen in India for any such demand to get created. Fortunately, the know-how, right, of designing PCBA and chips, Qualcomm has a lot of experience. And I would like to basically say that as far as India is concerned, we have the largest workforce outside United States stationed in India, right, in Bangalore and Hyderabad, and they are doing chip designing, right? And you can very clearly, we can very proudly can say that phones that are being consumed in India, right, are designed in India. So when we talk about going to Taiwan to learn design capabilities, we in Qualcomm has a lot of in-house expertise in India, right, to able to support companies, to come up to speed, to compete with global counterparts. So that capability exists, and we want to leverage that. The basic problem that we see is the government policies, right, has to be fine-tuned in order to incentivize people to make investments in India into these high-end activities. And that is where the biggest support is required, right? Unless that happens, then we will not be able to kickstart this whole initiative.
Want to elaborate a bit on what kind of government policies would kickstart the incentives ecosystem that you just mentioned?
Right. So if you see today, as far as the incentive structure that exists, so there is a cost barrier of around 10%, right, which is being bridged by duty differential, right, which the government has created from the point of view of phones that are assembled in India, then the CBU units which are being imported out of India. Now, that only distinguish between the CBU unit, the completely built unit, and the assembly at the SKD level. If the government can create a little bit more incentive and drill it down to the level of PCBA, then what happens is that there are incentives which can be clearly established from the point of view of doing the assembly in India, and then the whole thing will kickstart. I would like to basically point out, apart from the government policy part, right, which is simple to understand, I would like to also point out that, and before I elaborate further on that, one thing basically missed my attention, is the fact that why it is important to design phones and manufacture phone in India, right? And Vikas probably will elaborate on that, that we can get better control on quality, right? As you pointed out about that. The quality part is very significant, and if the manufacturers are able to do the assembly of PCB in India, they can control the quality of the phone end to end, which becomes very difficult, right, if some external companies are manufacturing the phones outside India. So that's what I basically wanted to talk about.
Thank you so much, Parag. Debashish, thank you for patiently waiting with us. I have a wish list from you, to request from you. So what do you think are the top 3 bottlenecks to this approach, the phased approach to making Make in India also a value in India in the context of mobile phone markets? And where do you think some key policy reforms can happen as you work with ELSINA? If you can share some thoughts in the context of the mobile phone markets in India. And you have been patient, I have been quiet, so any general thoughts also here would be most appreciated.
Embraced Make in India to the fullest with the kind of investments they made. They made the appeal of Prime Minister fruitful, and they had set up a lot of facilities, and it gone up, as your report says, up to 50. Now, if you look, if I say specifically, holistically, the bottlenecks for Make in India, or that could also include mobiles, I would still say that, ease of doing business on ground is still one of the bottlenecks. Manufacturing has many touch points across, in its course of production. So it still needs to be fine-tuned. The ease of doing business at taxes level, refunds, and all kinds of activities. Because a lot of state governments are attracting investment from mobile manufacturers through financial incentives in terms of VAT refunds, stamp duty reimbursements, and everything. There has to be seamless, process so that they get it without too much of pain, so that a person is not dedicated to look after, VAT refunds from the state governments. It's a cost. Those things needs to be, streamlined. That is the major thing. Second, I would say that, infrastructure, all-round development of infrastructure is the second biggest bottleneck. We are developing an electronics manufacturing cluster at Bhiwadi. Now, ELSINA was the association which floated the idea of EMC to DITI sometime in 2010-11 time frame. Then the bureaucrats there said, why don't you set up a cluster yourself first? So our members were very enthusiastic, said, okay, we'll set up the India's first greenfield EMC. We went around for land, we went to UP. After the land was allotted, getting possession of land was a big task for us. It took us 9 months to get the possession of the land. Our members paid 11 crore to Rajasthan government RICO, and we were eligible for allotment of land. After that, we found when we went there to take possession that there is some disputes on the land that Rajasthan government acquired. It took us 9 months to push the machinery that kindly, settle the problem of the farmers. They have not paid their compensation to them. They allocated land to us, took money from us. And they have been sending us demand notes saying that, you guys are defaulted, you are not paying your money. So how one can do, make in India? It's absolutely, sometimes you feel like, what we are doing. So this is, again, from an association thinking that, okay, we will develop infrastructure is something that we shouldn't have got into. It's best for state governments to establish the infrastructure, and our members should have gone there and taken up land. But we have done it, we are going ahead with it. We'll do that activity. But it's a pain for the industry. Had the industry got a dedicated electronic zone there, and 15-20 of our members who are invested could go there and set up infrastructure from tomorrow. That would have been, the icing on the cake. But that didn't happen. I would say the third bottleneck is the system. The system needs to be sensitized. They are out of tune with the development narrative. You see bureaucrats like Mr. Amitabh Kant at the helm of affairs, they are driving it. They are driving the Make in India initiative. But when you look at the machinery at the bottom or along the line, you find a lot of trouble there. So system needs to be sensitized. I think these are the three primary bottlenecks. One good thing that happened is the Department of Electronics IT has been upgraded to a ministry. This is one good thing for the industry. My personal belief is this electronic industry needs a dynamic minister of the likes of Piyush Goyal or a Suresh Prabhu. We need a technocrat to drive electronics. A distinguished IAS officer told me, what our members are doing, are they into manufacturing ACs and refrigerators, then it is, good cluster. It's not a good cluster if only that, they manufacture ACs and refrigerators. The guy who does, PCBA for Micromax and, the Foxconn and others, they are doing an awesome job. So that is the sensitization level that one has to look at, So I feel it's good that, we need definitely a good minister for electronics, who really can spend time, understand electronics, what is value addition is all about. If you talk about value addition, it's absolutely impossible for someone to understand value addition who is not into manufacturing. So again, value addition is very important. We are doing very low. At Elsina, many of our members do a lot of value addition. We have been pushing for a lot of value addition locally, and that should happen. That makes the mobile industry successful. I would say that my appeal would be to the ecosystem, the manufacturers, as well as the government, that we should be focused on our commitment to Make in India. And the Make in India, when I say, I mean the phased approach that we have been talking about, you mentioned. I think there was some discussion at DIT also already. There is a roadmap for electronics and mobile manufacturing. And I think we need to, as an ecosystem, all of us should be, committed to that. So that's my take. And I would again compliment that, all the mobile manufacturers are doing an awesome job. I think 100 million phones would create about 1 lakh of jobs. So more you produce, the more jobs are created. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Devashish. I think we will open up for some questions. You have been patiently hearing us. So why don't we take some questions from all of you?
both IM as well as Counterpoint has come out with the phased-wise approach till 2020. But what is it that you are asking from the government? That part is missing. Now, how do we reach that 1 lakh extra jobs and 1 million indirect job? Because if you're talking about phase 1, you're talking about 6 to 17% of localization happening. Out of that, we have achieved only 6%. And slowly you come to what we can say 35% that you're talking about in phase 3. My concern is, government has done X amount. What is that Y amount that needs to be done by 2020 or in the recent budget of 2017, which would be presented in February, so that industry can move forward at a faster pace and achieve their goals. So let the government do their job, the industry do their job, and the rest of the things will happen. So I wanted to know what the government should do, which is the missing part in this entire story.
Well, if you see the report, we have a specific recommendation section where we try to take an attempt at the Y part that you just mentioned. I think there are 3 aspects to this, and I would like Tarun and Neil also to chime in after I'm done. First, you have to believe in the idea that 30% localization is important for technological independence. Unless you believe in that idea, you continue to incur a high import bill from foreign manufactured phones. And just like our dependence on the oil import bills, we will continue to be dependent on foreign manufactured phones on that. So the belief is, a behavioral belief change is extremely important, which is why somewhat echoed with some of the thoughts that Debashish said. The second thing is, of course, at the macroeconomic level, so the import duty structure has to change. We saw that states are right now running a horse race with each other in terms of their specific VAT-based or other incentives to woo manufacturers and set up plants. What can be done in terms of not just competition, but also maybe co-opetition? So can one state share knowledge with another to create a larger pie? That's something, a framework for that may be useful for a larger localization and value addition in the economy. And the third is about jobs. So a lot of discussion when, as an economist, and also I know that when regulators are chatting with the industry people, the big concern is this phased approach, will it generate jobs? 1.5 lakhs is what we are estimating, and there are indirect jobs. But the point is, the nature of the jobs that will be generated. So it will be, today, 80% of the jobs are unskilled in this sector. To move from here to a scenario where 80% are skilled jobs, I think there's a lot of catchment pool we can target, and we can use them better, especially in a slowing global economy. And that can actually help us in capturing the value that's available, mainly because the demand is available. Because there is demand, we are in a unique spot where we are not just able to show value from the supply side, but also from the demand side as to how these smartphones can help us. Tarun, Neil, you want to chime in?
I would like to just add, when you asked the specific question on policy, right, I probably was not very clear on that. As far as the government is concerned, because let's understand what is happening today. The reason the manufacturing is happening in other countries compared to what it is happening in India is because there is a benefit to the manufacturer, the brands, right, from a cost point of view to continue in that particular direction. So what it basically means is that if you invest in India to bring those manufacturing processes which are happening in India into India, there is a difference of cost, right, which needs to be bridged, which means that the government has to give tax incentive, right? There has to be some kind of incentive either in terms of custom duty or in terms of other taxes to able to promote local value add. Unless you do that, there is no way for anybody to get motivated to basically start doing manufacturing in India. So that is very critical. The biggest point here which I wanted to basically say from a tax incentive point of view is the change in taxation structure which is going to happen going forward with GST coming in. Now with GST coming in, there is a lot of confusion, right? We really don't know what the final structure would be in place because the different taxation structure altogether from what we have seen. In the earlier taxation structure, what we have basically have seen is, or what we have experienced is, that whatever you pay at the custom duty point is the cost which the manufacturer has to basically experience or the importer has to experience, and it is basically getting passed on to the consumer because the cost. Whereas in case of GST, it's a value-added tax structure, starting from the beginning, from the custom point till the end. If anybody does not pay GST in the middle part of the overall chain, the consumer will have to pay anyway, right? Because it's a value-added system. So therefore, we need to come out with some kind of innovative structure, right, to compensate the manufacturers, who is sitting between the chain and has an impairment from the point of view of all the processes he is wanting to bring in India, right, which is currently in China, so that he can get compensated, right? And how the ticket get compensated is a very critical discussion, because I have no clarity at this particular point. I don't know, because if you have clarity, you can actually talk about it, right? But that is very, very critical. And unless that happens, it is going to be very difficult.
And I just want to build on Parag's point. Something else struck my mind now. Some of the thoughts that he shared are most probably going to incentivize value addition and localization in the short to medium run, 5-year period. But as an economist, I would like to think of what will happen in the next 20-year period. And as a Micromax learns by doing value addition here, localizing here, I think they will generate IP. And that IP needs to be protected. And we need to have an environment and architecture in the context of mobile phone market, standards, intellectual property, such that they can go and become, just like we see as Xiaomi have IP today, not just a Samsung. We want to make sure that Micromax and others also have IP that can enable them to become global manufacturers, not just Indian manufacturers, so they can go into their export markets as well. So that's something also I think is worth for the government to think about.
Yes, I have a question, that as far as telecom industry is concerned, there are two Indias, that are living side by side. One of them is the person who has 2 or 3 premium high-end models, for example, like Apple, Samsung, he has got 2 or 3 different operators. For him, there's no issue. There is other India which is living, for whom, there are issues of call drops, when the call drops, issue of call drops. When the Jio does not succeed, the entire industry gets, tainted, Then there is artificial intelligence and IoT, which is going to gain traction, because this hardware infrastructure is getting saturated. So much of the growth is going to come from that end. And then there's no 4G infrastructure, in India, vendors, for example, like Huawei in China, which can, work side by, which can, basically collaborate with the Indian, OEMs, So how do you look at that? Because, India is, because the entire, this telecom industry depends a lot more on the entire ecosystem, entire chain, rather than simply on hardware and that.
I would like Neil maybe to share some thoughts here. Because you have to leave. But I do want to say that sometimes we get too caught up in the heterogeneity that India presents to us. 2 India, 3 India, multiple Indias. But I think the story is that you have to disaggregate yourself and think about the big picture. There is just one India if you want. There are success stories in other contexts where one India has presented a unified vision. But Neil, specific to the mobile phone market, if you have anything to say here.
And thanks for your question. So if you talking about 2 Indias, actually there are no 2 Indias. If you look at the overall mobile phones sold, right, almost 85% of phones are still sold below $150 price points. And if you talk about the premium, it is just 4% of the market. So it's not a huge market, the premium market. So there is no difference between the consumers. Everyone is price conscious. Everyone wants good value for their product, even if it's a 60K phone or a 10K phone or 5K phone. But your point is right. Then the next growth engine would be artificial intelligence, IoT. But for that to happen, we have to first reach the first stage, which is empowering everyone with a smartphone and broadband. And until we have that infrastructure, we won't be able to reach the AI or IoT level. So we are still way behind on AI and IoT, and it won't happen until 2025, right? And you rightly make the point that we don't have any infrastructure vendors. Similarly, US also does not have any infrastructure vendor. It's mostly just 3, Huawei, Nokia, and Ericsson, right? And Nokia and Ericsson are mostly Europe, and China, we have ZTE and Huawei, right? So we need to have a global infrastructure player, but first of all, we don't have that much intellectual property, because all these 4 companies, they have invested a lot in intellectual property over the decades to build that expertise of infrastructure. And if we don't have an intellectual property, as Parag said, if we don't have an intellectual property environment, right, then we won't be able to reach that. So this is the first step. First, we have to start building the smartphones and intellectual property in-house, and then we take the next step of thinking about infrastructure and other artificial intelligence software side of things.
I had a small query from Devashish. And Neil as well as Tarun talked about PCB and PCBA, and even Vikas said that he is importing those. For PCB and PCBA to be successful, it is all dependent on you people, Elsina and the Bhiwadi factory. So what is the update, and have you started manufacturing, or it will still take some more years for the manufacturing to start? So that, or what is the update, and when do you see component level manufacturing for the so many clusters of manufacturers who are setting up the factory there?
Okay. Now, first to address your question about PCB and PCBA, you know, in the last previous budget, Government of India announced a 10% production subsidy for the manufacturers who are doing PCB manufacturing in India. I think that's a huge amount, and it's a big incentive for anyone to set up PCB manufacturing in India. Assembly activity is going on. It will continue. We do have a lot of manufacturers in India who's doing PCBA. We do have a thriving EMS market. Many of you have heard about EMS earlier, I'm sure. That's the PCBA that we are talking about. So I would say, you know, it's strong, it's active. The PCBA industry is there already. We need to have more PCB manufacturers to come in, and then that will you know, bridge the gap in the value addition that we are talking about. Now, coming to Bhiwadi cluster, we are currently in the, you know, we got the possession of the land in January, so we are currently in the process of developing the basic infrastructure there. When you say basic infrastructure, it means, you know, it's a barren agricultural land. Then we are, you know, setting up roads, drainage, grading, you know, electricity, telecom. All this kind of activities are going on. Some of our members are likely to start setting up their own passive infrastructure, maybe in Jan-Feb of next year. And our estimate is that, you know, it's a Government of India funded project, wherein if I want to elaborate slightly, Government of India, the DITI, now we call METI, is giving about 50% of the development cost, and 50% is being borne by the members. Members do pay their land cost separately. There is no incentive there. So the development cost is been paid now. You know, in the cluster, it's kind of, you know, a DLF housing and a DDA. So that is the difference. You can gauge. When we are up and running by the end of next year, around this time we should be up and running with all the infrastructure ready. Some of our members should set up their factories, and we are looking at December 2017 to kickstart operation. Our estimate is, you know, we would be, the Elsina cluster would be the first EMC in India which will kick off. There are about 15 other clusters in India. Some of them doesn't have investors there. They have their infrastructure ready. They are waiting for the investors to come. Bhopal, which has been started about 3 years back, has got 2 companies started, you know, operation there. But we would see kind of, you know, a bit more mushrooming of operations, and hopefully we might be able to invite all of you for the, you know, formal inauguration sometime December next year at Bhiwadi.